All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol. Okay, so we have a very special guest on the podcast this evening. Jordan from BC Backcountry is on for his second time. He came on and talked some elk hunting strategies early September, and at that point we agreed, because I was getting equal questions from his mule deer escapades as I was from his elk hunts, that we would limit that conversation to elk and really dive into mule deer on this second conversation. Jordan is an absolute killer. And on top of that, I find him a really self-aware dude. So not only does he do a lot of things that bring about success, he's aware of what those things are and he can hold a conversation about them, which I think makes him a really great individual to learn from. And he's a pretty humble guy too. I think he could probably take more credit than he takes. But I'm super excited for this conversation. I know I'm going to get to learn a lot, and I hope you guys really enjoy this as well. Please take a moment to engage with the podcast, like, share, comment, subscribe. All of that helps me grow the channel, and I really appreciate it. And as always, if you want to support the podcast directly, mindfulhunter.com/shop. Go buy a shirt, go buy a hat. It helps me grow the channel. Other than that, if you need anything from me, hit me up on Instagram, mindful_hunter, or shoot me an email, jay@mindfulhunter.com. And here's Jordan, and you can find him on Instagram at BC Backcountry, all one word. All right, here's the interview.
It was a wicked season. It was super fun. I think we must have talked then probably post bow season then, pre-rifle. We've had slotted it in probably right between those two trips for
I think that's exactly when it was. Yeah.
So bow season was fun, had lots of chances. It was lots of action. But nothing hit the dirt. Went back into rifle, and it was just kind of really good rut activity. There's lots of action. We had lots of locations where we'd already found elk from bow, and we were back in the same area. So we already had like pockets of elk that we knew about.
Yep.
And so we were already kind of hitting the ground running when we got out there. So I can't even remember when our first bull went down, but it might've been day 2 or 3. Like it was quick, right? It was kind of like hit this spot in the morning. Okay. Nothing happening. Hit that spot in the afternoon. Got a bull going. It's just 5 point, and then hit the next spot the next morning. I think we were on our first 6 point, and it was our first bull was kind of the best bull of the trip, which was cool. Had a couple years of age, just a squeaker 6 on the one side, but came out right in a cut, which never happens for us. So it was sweet to get that done, right? Half the time it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 yards, right? And you're in some big stuff. So that was a cool one. Pulled it right out of the cut and had time to look them over. And it was one of those things where, elk come in and you're just looking at that point right away and you're like, he's got a split, and you're just trying to gauge how big it is, right? So he just played in our cards really nicely, which was sweet because there was no pressure to make a call, snap decision. It was like, watching one side and we're like, yeah, that's almost. And then watching the other side swing around a couple of times, and that's like, okay, yeah, that's, I got a full inch on the other side, right? So you can kind of tell that one was perfectly legal, and whacked that one up close. And then
so one quick question I got for you is, and we never actually touched on this, how do you guys decide shooter? Because you kind of got a gang of guys up there with you.
Yeah, we've got a really big sized group now, right? And it's kind of just naturally grown over the years as things go, right? And not many of us, if only one of us has, 2 of us have kids right now. So 3 of us have kids. Thanks. So anyways, they're pretty good at getting time off even with the families, but they're all kind of that stage where they can get away for a week or so from the wife and family and make it happen. So the group's big. In the past, man, we've always just done, there's a designated shooter, but you sacrifice nothing to give that person a shot. So You're trying to say, okay, it's this person's go this year, hasn't tagged a bull yet. So whenever he's with somebody that's calling, all efforts to make that guy the shooter, right? But the bottom line is, if there's a follow-up shot required, whoever's available takes it, right? And if the bull comes out in the wrong place and the caller gets a shot, the caller takes it, right? So it's kind of like you're pushing for the shooter that's designated, and then whoever gets a shot takes it when it's all said and done. So nobody gets, upset that it was my turn or nothing like that. It's just a matter of making sure the bull hits the dirt and moving on, right? But generally just took turns. The first bull goes down. There's no preference who's shooting, and then you're trying to get the next guy, and then you're trying to get the next guy, and trying to get the next guy, and it just kind of, me and Ryan ended up doing a lot of the calling, so we kind of split up, and there's always a guy or two with each of us, right? And then it all comes together, and somebody whacks a bull, and you're like, okay, well, I've whacked so many, you've whacked so many. Let's try and get Buddy his first bull, right? So it's kind of cool. Everyone's tagged except for our newest guy Matt, who just joined the group last couple of years. So everyone's whacked a bull now, which is really cool. Everyone's got one of the belt.
So now he'll likely be up kind of beginning of next season. That's how you guys approach it.
Totally right. So all efforts
that's cool, man.
Bull, right? So just nice, and it's fun for the caller, right? Gets to see the action and call the play and make it happen, right? So so it goes. But no, I didn't pull the trigger at all this year, and neither did Ryan. Everywhere else was on the bulls basically. So it's a good way to go, right?
I mean, good on you guys for that, man, because you're kind of pulling a lot of the weight too, like as far as the preseason work goes and the calling and all that kind of stuff. Like and I know that it's not just about that for you guys, and maybe that's why you guys have the success you do, because you're not so concerned with it being personal success. That's an interesting angle, because I don't know a lot of people who would be like that selfless, and that's pretty badass. That's all. I think that's cool.
You know what? Like between me and Ryan, like Ryan's always been like way less or way more selfless than me. Like he's like, I don't ever need to pull the trigger. It's all good. Like I just want it to go down. He's like, I love calling, and he was always the best caller at the beginning. Yep. So he was hands down the guy that was going to make it happen most trips until kind of I built my skills, and then other people kind of start getting on the game as well. But he's been super good that way. I'm like, a bit selfish at times. Like I like to be behind the trigger. I love calling. I also want to kill once in a while too, right? So
of course.
It's nice to be a part of the guy behind the trigger as well. But I have been really lucky, and like just the way things work out, I've been whacking bulls year after year lately. So I think I've gone like 3 out of 4 years putting the 6 point down, and I've got
that's like nice, man. I think too with elk, there is a difference about being the caller. Like it's not like anything else. Like even when you make a spot, let's say mule deer hunting, like you don't feel the same level of responsibility. But when you call in that bull, it is a bit of a notch on your belt. Like, so there is a bit of like a shared accomplishment and conquest, I think that's pretty intriguing.
100%, man. It's I agree. You once you're calling and you work the bull and you kind of bend your will or impose your will on them, it's kind of like, man, that's the whole thing of, it's like pulling the animal all the way in and then deciding not to pull the trigger, right? You've done all the work, and in the elk situation, it's just, you're just not the guy on the trigger, right? So a total different level of satisfaction on that side of it for sure.
Okay, so we're 2 days deep. We've got the first bull on the ground.
Yeah, easy pack out. Boys are in and out, and we got this whole elk quartered up, butchered up, and then we're back to the truck within a couple.
What are you doing for meat care? Like, do you run it out to a locker or something? Or are you?
Yeah, we'll drive into the closest town, find a freezer somewhere. So we keep our camp kind of meat free, which is nice for grizzly bears and all that. We don't have to worry about it. And we've done like some way more remote hunts where you're dealing with losing meat. Yeah, it's a lot of fun way to be sitting in camp, constantly trying to deal with meat going bad or flies getting on it or worried about it. It's like, make the trip, get it out of your hair, get it in the freezer somewhere, get it looked after, and then the meat's gonna be premium when you're done, and stress-free for the rest of the trip. So you're not trying to pack up early and get home before it spoils or something like that, right? And
I'm in the middle of planning a 7 to 10 day caribou hunt, fly in out of Deese for my old man, my brother, and myself. And this is one of the things I'm thinking is that, we take a boo on day 2, there's still 2 other guys who are trying to tag out, and it's like, now I got 8 days left of a hunt, and I'm actually thinking, if things timed perfectly, because I know I need 2 flights out anyways, just might have that one flight come in the middle, grab 2 animals, get them out of there, and then we could do the 3 dudes and the last animal on the last day type of deal. But it's really been playing over in my mind, because I'm pretty good for like 3 to 4 days. I can keep meat in most circumstances, especially that like late September. I think it'll, especially as far north as we'll be, but you start getting past 3, 4, 5 days, and unless you're in like legitimately cool weather, it like shit starts getting a little bit sketchy.
100%. No, it's those types of hunts, right? It gets complicated, right? It's the decision-making process. It's like all of a sudden, can you even shoot like a big game animal on day 1? Yeah. It's like, well, you're kind of already, taking your back end of your trip and pulling it forward, right? Yeah. So start saying, shit, wait, we're not ready yet, huh?
Totally.
Yeah. No, for sure. So we do the freezer. So we get that all processed and dealt with, and then we, I can't remember the second bull.
I should be able to remember. I followed along close enough.
The second, sorry, go ahead.
I should remember I followed along closely enough when you guys were in there.
You know what? We were pushing a ton of bulls for a few days and not getting counts, getting 5 points and working like some hot action, but just, you know, never being able to close the deal and get up and close and personal. And our one buddy went out for a morning putt and literally got a bull going from the truck and walked away from it because he couldn't tell how the hell he's going to get in there, you know, what the route was to take. Went, checked out another area, came back, one call, the bull lit up again. And so at this point, he's got all eyes on him. So we're all spread on different areas. We had a blowout morning. There was nothing happening. So we were on our way hiking out and, you know, we had cell coverage at the moment. So got a message from him saying, got a bull going. We're up at such and such a point. So we basically just sprinted out and like, hey, we're on our route, on our way, right? We're going to be an hour and a half, best case scenario, just like try to keep tabs on the bull, whatever. And we'll make a plan going as a group. Meanwhile, Ryan's up on another ridge glassing across this guy. And he's like, yeah, you got elk above you as well. And he's getting calls below him and there's elk above him. Now we're like an hour into the elk above him or we're going after the elk below. And so the ones above look like a big bodied animal with a herd of cows. So we get there, there's 4 of us now. So we like just sprint into these other elk, close the gap in like 30, 40 minutes. But the bull had just stepped into the timber like 10 minutes before we got there. So we called, we set up, we did everything, and they weren't coming back out. And it's late morning at that point, right? And he had his cows already. So I assume that was a herd bull there that just kind of tucked up in the timber. So at that point, we're like, it's super steep, it's super thick where they are. And we'd already pushed those elk before from above. And so we knew the kind of little hole that they're in. And it wasn't a place that was going to go running in after them. So we bailed back out, went back to these other elk, got them going, quickly realized there was 2 bulls. And then we started trying to figure out, pick a path through here. So long story short, the terrain was actually really shitty. But we managed to get in there close enough where we had some room to maneuver, some open country to move through because everything was just blow down, pick up sticks to get in there. And we could not find much routes that were walkable. So got in there where the wind was kind of not working to our favor, but we had enough of a buffer that they weren't going to smell us. And so we just kind of worked it from there, got some calls, kind of, you know, spent our time to kind of try to pinpoint where it was. And then we just used some open meadows and just boogied. So we did this massive lap around where the bull was, came in downwind. And at that point, we kind of had a bit of control of the wind. It was kind of working with us finally. And then we're on our way to this bull. It's thrashing. We're guns up multiple times waiting for it to come out. And then finally I grabbed my buddy and I just like kind of pushed him like right there, pushed him against the tree. And like he's turning around to look at me. So I'm about to rip a bugle and like expect this bull to pop out, you know, 40 yards away. He looks at me and then his eyes just friggin' bugged out. I look over my shoulder what the hell he's looking at. And there's just a 6x6 broadside, 60 yards, completely wrong place for this bull to step out from. I had no fucking idea what was happening, right? I was like, what the shit? And so I just like binoculared up and it does like, and you can tell he's like full like posed broadside, just staring at you like he just caught us with our pants down, but he also knows his pants are down.
Yeah.
And we're all just kind of like, holy shit. And so I just like flew binoculars up as quick as possible, had my bugle tucked under my arm, and it's basically he just turned to run. And as he turned, it was just like you can obviously see his whole spread, right? And he's looking at me, you can obviously see all his brows, his thirds, his fourths, and you're just like looking for that last split. So as soon as he turned, I don't even know if I had my binoculars up, to be honest, now that I think about it. I think I was bringing my binoculars up, he turned, and I could just see this obvious split that was like 4 or 5 inches long. I was like, 6-point shoot. And he just smacked him right there, dropped them, and we're just like, holy shit, right? So we're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And we walk up to this bull, there's a doorknob, and we're like, man, how do you know what just happened? What's going on? And then sure enough, the bull we were after lights back up again. And we're like, holy shit. So we ended up working that bull as well. Ryan came and hiked in at this point. He worked that bull. I worked the bull. They got close. They got a look at him, saw like the split, but couldn't make sure that it was like easily over an inch. And so he got away, but they came out and packed that bull with us. So again, full crew of like 6 guys packing a bull.
That's great, man.
We had like, 3 or 4 stops and the thing was all the way out in like 2 hours, 3 hours, and we're back to the truck. So it was just like a, easy midday pack out. Everything was like super, super enjoyable, right? So I was really lucky. And then get that back to the butcher as well. I can't remember if we took a day off at that point. And then I think we just basically went straight after that same bull. So we started chasing some of those other herds and then maybe gave him 1 day off, and then we went back after that same bull, and Ryan just worked the shit out of him, pulled him way out of his comfort zone, and had shooters way in front of him, like 200 yards in front of him. They got a good clean look and was able to make the count and put it down, right? So it was a pretty cool trip. 3 bulls in like 6 days, and then we just said, you know what, we've had our way with these elk, and there's multiple bulls to chase right now, but you know, we've all got half an elk at this point.
Yeah,
there's no need to really whack another one, right? And me and Ryan both not on the trigger, but just a part of every kind of play that was happening, right? So we all felt pretty satisfied with that hunt. So really cool way to start the year off for sure, man. It was
that's pretty responsible decision too, man. Good on you for that. Because I mean, it's not always the easiest thing to walk away from an opportunity-rich environment, even though it might be the right thing to do.
Yeah, and honestly, like 2 bulls were quite young. Like they had the 6-point criteria, but you know, it was just like we were looking at like 3.5-year-old bulls. And
right.
Like, you know, we've taken 3 bulls. There's definitely like bigger bulls that we chased this year. It was almost like you've always wanted to make that happen. We've always wanted the 2 bulls because our group was getting bigger.
Yep.
And then we got 2 bulls, right? And then kind of like, you know, 1 year we're going to get 3. It's just going to happen. And then all of a sudden it was just like a gift. It was like one after another. And you're like, It was almost like that kind of thing that like kind of looked into it finally. Like we did it. Like, you know, finally cards went our way. We got 3 bulls. And then you realize we don't have to kill 3 bulls, right?
Right.
That may have been the goal and the target. You may have been like wanting to be able to prove that you can do it and make it happen and be on that much action. But you get 3 bulls down. We had plenty of meat, and it was like, you know what, that was really cool. But I think that was a game changer for all of us. We came back from that hunt, and it was just like none of us like wanted to go and look for a squeaker 6. We're all like, you know what, we've done it. Like let's set our sights higher. So we're probably going to transition and kind of change the areas that we're hunting and the ways that we're hunting. We're probably going to go back into chasing kind of lower population areas with bigger bulls and be a little more selective, looking for something with a couple more years of age, right? And not that you can't do it where we are, it's just they're much harder to get with the higher age class there, right? Like so many of the bulls are just coming of age, just getting to breeding age, and you're popping them the first time they get a split that's over an inch, and it's like, you know, they're not old and they're not big bulls for the majority of the time, and you know, we've had a lot of fun shooting like good bulls in the past, so we kind of want to get back to that and try to get on some bigger animals, right? Different pursuit, different challenge for sure.
100%, man. Makes total sense. It's up in the air whether I'm going to get out for bear this year, but I've already made a decision. Like that's where I'm at with bear hunting. Like last year I doubled up, and I'm not like the one was a pretty nice guy. You know what I mean? Like he was big and fat and old. I'm glad I took him out. He was ready to go, but the other one was pretty small, and I used my rifle on both of them. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not even into shooting bears with rifles. Like it's kind of like, it feels like cheating. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what was that? But I kind of had this double thing in my head, and it was like, so it was fun and everything, but you just knew immediately afterwards. I'm like, nah, it's not that thing that I'm looking for. It's not there right now. Like I don't have that feeling that I normally get when I like go up against like a worthy foe. You know what I mean? And it's so it's like already in my head that like if I get out this year, it's like big old 7-footer or fuck it, I'll go home empty.
Yeah, man, I hear you on that one. Like I've done so much bear hunting and so few bears killed, but it's always been bow. And I think I've killed one bear with my rifle, and that was a bear I got last year. And it was just to get back into bear hunting, right? I didn't have time to shoot the bow in the spring, and I really wanted to get out. I haven't done it for so long, and it was really fun. But yeah, quickly it's like, okay, I've got a bear again. I got a bit of the bug, but it's going to be bow again, right? For me, for sure.
I think I may take some newbies out this year. A couple of dudes, an older guy and his kid hit me up at the gym. And I know there's a couple people who've never gone out. And I'm thinking that's something I could get behind. Like I think a rifle bear is like a great first animal. They're all over the place. We can do some fun day hunts, you know, like, and then I could still get out. And I do like bear meat. So if I'm like, I'm taking a guy out, like I'll take a quarter home for myself. Sure. But I think that'll be a good way to get out and still put some animals down. But as far as my own pursuits, I'm at the same place.
Yeah. No, I actually, those are some of my favorite hunts, right? It's if you take somebody new or somebody that's just trying to fill a tag or their first time, it's like, you kind of just get excited again at the spotting of a game, which just makes it fun because, you know, when you kind of start to be selective, you know, you see an animal, you're not all pumped up at the time, right? Because right away you're kind of saying, okay, how old is it? How big is it? This and that. It's like, we got a new hunter. It's like, okay, you know, this is probably a shooter. Let's see if we can get position. Let's see if we can make it happen. And it's so much fun just getting somebody else behind the gun, getting on an animal, right? So,
well, and that's funny. I'll tell the mule deer story when we get over to mule deer, but I had a very similar. That's kind of what happened with me and Spence when we got on our mule deer. So, what have I what have I done for hunting since I saw you? I guess I did my mule deer hunt, and then I did an archery whitetail hunt, but I didn't do anything late September because my sheep hunt, which I went on just before talking to you guys, was kind of like, we went like that mid-August. So I stayed home for September. So that was all I got in my fall. And we got a nice, not a nice, it was it was a smaller mule deer. And then I got a doe with my bow in, do you know Kettle River?
Yeah.
He passed away, hey, Melvin?
Oh, sorry, Kettle. Who?
Do you know? Oh, Kettle River Outfitters. They're by Kettle River, outside of
okay.
Outside.
Sorry,
he's been there for like
the river, and I was saying, yeah, of course, but okay. The outfitter, the head outfitter.
Yeah. Kettle River Outfitters. He passed away this year, so that was super weird because I hooked up this hunt, and then I heard from my buddy. He was like, "Yeah, he passed away," and I was like, "What?" And then his wife never really told me or anything, so I was like, "Okay, well, I guess I'm going hunting." And she decided to just like finish up the last 2 weeks. A couple of the guides stuck around and everything. But he's a bit of a fixture in that, like I think he's owned that outfit for like 30 years or something. Like crazy how long he's been down there. And anyways, not like, kind of off on a tangent, but poor guy, man. Yeah. He was out moving stands and just had a jammer. Yeah, so it's like 6 o'clock and nobody had seen him, and they went out and they followed the sled tracks, and fucking there he was, man. I mean, I guess if you're gonna go,
I was gonna say, man, one of the things you're gonna go doing what you love.
Doing what you love, you know what I mean? Like, if I'm out in the woods and I just fucking pass out and that's just all she wrote, like, it could be worse, man.
100%. Yeah. No doubt. Cool. So you got your mule deer in October then?
Yeah. So let's transition to mule deer. You kind of got me out to, and then we'll get into your, because I think yours is going to be a little bit more poignant for like actual tactics. Because I probably should have had it. I was going to call you before, but anyways. So we wanted to go to a new area. A buddy told me a tip. It was basically like that whole, and I don't mind saying it was this specific, but kind of that area back behind Caramillos. Kind of like Caramillos to the border. And there's a bunch of different like peaks and draws back there. And it's not a secret that there's like decent mule deer populations back there. Yeah. So we were back in there, went way back in, hiked in 26 kilometers from the truck, went in for 6 days, and just got brutalized by weather. Like just blizzard, nonstop, 6 days, multiple feet of snow. Like it was crazy. And basically saw nothing. And we were starting to see some tracks, and it was kind of interesting because when you go on this big walk back there, you go through like very different little ecosystems. Like you'll be going through like a grassland and you'll see like no sign. And then you hit the timber, and then you'll start seeing all the tracks crossing the trail that you're walking on. And then you come back out on another opening and it kind of opens up again. And so the one thing we did notice is like they were definitely concentrated to the timber, but there's also like this big crazy burn back in there. Anyways, we hunted hard, man. And we were doing a combination of like spot and stalk and still hunting the timber. And I think that the still hunting the timber, I felt more like I was blacktail hunting than mule deer hunting, to be honest with you, which is probably, pretty similar to what you're going to describe because that's very much your style as opposed to like traditional Western mule deer hunting. And that's where we were getting the better action. Like, I know I spooked a couple out of beds, like on more than one occasion. Like you'd get there and you're like, fuck. Yeah. Like these guys just heard me like 10 minutes ago. Like I can see pellets on the ground.
Fresh tracks walking out. Right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's like still seeing bare grass and like melted beds. And like you could see how they're so crafty too, because they'll loop around from their own tracks to make a bed. So it's like while I'm I busted myself by following your tracks.
Yeah,
because
man, it's weird how
you did it. You almost bedded like down below where your own tracks were, so that you would hear me coming, and that happened on more than one occasion. I never saw a single buck when we were all the way back in. And then Spencer one time got on a doe, but obviously can't shoot a doe. And then, yeah, man, and it was crazy. Blizzarded. We finally made it to the last day. Still hadn't seen anything, so we go to walk out, and we're like, we're just going to smash this 26K in one day. Fuck it. And so we get 16K done, and we get to this little place. We decide to have a bite to eat. And then we're coming down this thing, and up on this big face, there's a huge herd of sheep, which is pretty cool to see. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they're not giant sheep back in there, but we did blow out another sheep one time that was like a big three-quarter curl.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we look up the hill, we see all these sheep. We're like, oh man, that's really wild. And that's the thing. On the way out, the weather broke. And by the time we got back to this halfway point to the truck, it's blue skies, snow's gone. And it was everybody had just woke up and wherever they'd been hiding for the last week, everybody's coming out to play, right?
Yeah,
and so we're walking down this grassy slope, and way down, a kilometer and a half easy, we see this little movement. And we're like, oh, this is really weird. So we break out the spotter, and at first glance, it just looks like does. But this is October. I want to say it's right before the 4-point season kicks in, which I think is October 31st. So maybe we're last week of October. We're still any buck. And we did that very intentionally. You know what I mean? Because it's if we're going back in, I don't want to not be able to shoot a big old 3-point.
Totally.
So I'm looking at Spence, and I'm like, they look like all does, but it's dude, it's the last week of October. I'm telling you, there's not just going to be 8 does just hanging out by themselves. It's just not going to happen. And so we decided to walk down a little bit more. We thought we blew them out. And then when we got about 800-900 yards away, I lift my binos again. And you know what was funny? I couldn't even see the antlers. It was all body language. Yeah. I looked in the binos, and I'm like, that's a buck. Just so he was just up, and he was looking, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's a buck for sure. So I'm like, okay, let's make a play. And there's these giant boulders on this big grassy slope. And there's one about 200 yards in front of us. And now it looks like the deer are coming back up the slope, and we're probably 800 yards away.
Yeah.
So we like kind of crouch down, beeline it to this big boulder. And I mean big, like the size of like a fucking Dodge Maxi van, like giant. Yeah. And get behind it, creep out in the corner, and I line up, and the deer at like 450 right now. And they're just like walking right at us.
Coming right at you. Cool.
Like on a rope, nice. Man.
Yeah.
And so I finally spot the actual buck, and it's a pretty small 2x2. What shocked me though was the body size. Like they grow a big back in there, man. I was like, holy shit. Like, and maybe that's why his antlers looked even smaller to me, because his body was just so big.
It's always surprising, man, like how a young buck will outgrow an old doe so quickly, right? Like
it's wild.
A year and a half, 2.5-year-old buck is bigger than a 4 or 5-year-old doe, right? Like
100%.
Bigger.
Yep.
Crazy.
And immediately when I look at it, my heart kind of sinks. I'm like, I can't shoot this deer. Like it's just not something that I feel right about. But I look at Spencer and I'm like, do you want to shoot this thing? And he's doing backflips. Like, yes, let me. I'm like, great, no problem. Yeah, it's great. I'll take home some meat. Yeah. And so I set my rifle up, dial it in, and we're kind of playing a bit of a waiting game, because it's like, I'm not going to take a 450 shot if I don't have to. Like sub 3 to me is like kind of gimme territory. 3, 4, 5. Now you're definitely inviting opportunity for error. And if we don't have to push it. So they just keep walking and walking and walking, and I'm not really paying attention. And all of a sudden they're at like 220. And I'm like, okay, now I don't want to, now we're like maybe getting too close, because it's like, they're going to, they could see us move or hear
or something.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, let's get this done. Dial it in. Boom. He smokes the buck, one shot, beautiful, walk over, no problem. And so,
nice.
And so that was that. So, and then we like skinned him, got to the truck at like, and the thing that sucks about driving home from Caramios is there's like nothing on the way home. Like everything was closed. And what the fuck is that? Starts with a P.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Princeton. No fast food, no nothing. I'm eating like Pringles and some other horse shit from Chevron at like midnight. Like and you know what it's like when you're so overtired and so hiked out, like your body's almost like revolting. Like I had a stomach ache and I'm like the shivers, and I was like, all I wanted was like a hot burger and like a Coke. And it was just like nothing. It was brutal, man. Anyways.
Yeah, man, I hear you.
And that was the hunt. So, I mean, at least we got an animal. Spencer was really excited. It was his first. He's got a blacktail with a bow, but that was his first mule deer. So, and when we took something home. So,
always good, man. Nice to round out a trip with a kill if you can, for sure. Especially if he's first mule deer for him, right? That's wicked. That's funny though. That whole story about nothing open. Our third bull that we ever got. And we hadn't killed a bull in like 2 years. We did a backpack hunt and, got on bulls with the bow, and then it switched to rifle season, and we switched to the rifle. We ended up killing the same bull we were chasing with the bow, and had like 60 yards from us, but couldn't get closer, couldn't get a shot. 3 days later in rifle season, and we had just mountain weather, right? That's the thing. September, mountain weather, it's 30 degrees, and then it's -5 and it's snowing, right? So we killed that bull with 2 inches of snow on the ground, shivering, soaking wet. And then, by the time we got to the bull, the sun was out, it was 10 degrees, the snow was melting, and we packed him out that night. And we drove. We were so pumped. About this nice bull. Everyone on the cloud and I were like, let's go to town, right? Well, town's like 2 hours away. And, we're on back roads for a while, and then highways, and then another highway, and then get to town. And everything was closed. We had this whole plan, like, we're going to go to the hot springs. We're going to go grab burgers and beers, and we're come back with a fresh bottle of whiskey, and then we're going to get drunk in the tent. It's going to be great. And I was just like, everything's closed. I think we found one little pub that was open that we did like takeaway or something like that. Like grabbed a bottle of booze from the liquor store. Oh no, it was liquor store was open, no pubs were open, and it was the gas station. So I think we just grabbed some gas station or E&W or something got attached to it, and a bottle of booze, and drove back. We're like, fuck, this is too bad, right?
Yeah. You're so excited, man. It's happened so many times. It's brutal.
Yeah, we had spent like 4 nights in the mountains, right? And just packed out. We were so pumped. It was just like, blowout, right?
Yeah. So
if you want to go into my season, we can jump into that for sure.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll mention is I did my first whitetail stand hunt. And that was with Kettle River Guides. They've got a pretty cool thing, man. You can go do like a whitetail meat hunt, 3 days, $2,500. And I didn't see any bucks. I think one came in on the evening of night 2, but it was so dark that I don't know for sure. Again, it was just like a body language thing. But then on the third day, I smoked a doe, really nice, good doe. And that kind of got me fired up for more stand hunting, which is not something I've ever really done. But I was pretty shocked how into it I was. Like, that is a shitload of fun, man.
Different experience, eh?
Totally different experience. But when you're sitting up there and they're 30 yards away and you got like does walking underneath you and you got to be crazy quiet, and it's like, it's just a different type of challenge. I think for me, the ultimate would be getting a little rec property and like working it over a few years and figuring out, that would be the true challenge that I would get really, because it's hard to like just rock up to a joint and hunt like that. Like you do need, you got to have some idea of the movement patterns and the bedding areas and all that kind of stuff. So I think it would be a bit tough to do run and gun, but I'm working with one dude, and I'm going to go to Alberta kind of late November next year. But I definitely want to do more archery stand hunting, because I think
it's a cool experience, right? I think some of the fun of that kind of stuff is just watching deer that don't know you're there, right? And
100%.
It happens more in a stand than it'll happen anywhere else, right? Because anywhere else, they're going to kind of know you're there most of the time, or they're going to be aware that something isn't right, and they won't be quite as like, inclined to just act normal and do normal behaviors and activities, right? But it's kind of cool when you're like fly on the wall and they don't know you're there, right?
Yeah, 100%, man. So yeah, that's it. So let's hear your mule deer season.
Yeah, for sure. So, gosh, I can't even remember the timeline there, but it was late October, early November. I went up to the ridge with Rick, and I don't know if that was my first trip up or my second trip up. Can't remember if it already, like, normally I kind of set cams up, and what ends up happening is I don't hunt October for deer. but I try to get out last weekend of October or earlier to get cams up. But it always happens that, you've gone all, summer we're fishing, and then September we're pretty much elk hunting the whole month, and then working in between and catching up with family and friends where we can. And so when October comes, it's just kind of got to get caught up in life and spend time with family and all that, and do the good stuff at home. So I don't really get out there till last 2 weeks of October or the first week of November. And as luck would have it, that tends to be fairly productive time to be out there anyway. So I've been out there setting cams and killed deer, right? And that's how I got the first buck was stickers. There was setting cams and doing laps, and it was just one of those days when the deer were on the move, and I'm boogieing on foot trying to get the hell out of there before I get kind of stuck in the dark and can't make my way out. So I ended up jumping that deer and spending the night up there because I knocked him down, and then it was late, so I was like, there's no way I'm packing this thing out in the dark and doing the big journey home. So yeah, anyways, we got up there.
Were you prepped for overnight, or did you just like?
Yeah, we've got kind of that little base camp set up in there, right? So,
Okay.
So we always are packing some waters in and stocking it so that when we get up there in hunt season, we're not like hiking in super heavy with a bunch of gear and shit.
Cool.
So we always kind of spend the time to stock it up, whether it's spring or late October, to get some shit to see us through, right? So
nice.
That is kind of, it's, very unique to that scenario where we've kind of done like a permanent or semi-permanent canvas wall tent up there where we've, cut a couple limbs down an A-frame and put the canvas wall over it and pack the stove in. So there's something like super like comfortable there.
Yeah.
It allows us to go in every weekend through all November without having to like, get all your gear sorted and have this ultralight tent and all this other stuff, right? It's like you just head in there and everything's there for us. It's just like lock in.
Badass, man. Yeah.
It's super convenient, right? It allows you to hunt really hard. You can head out in dawn and come back at dark, soaking wet 2 hours after the sun sets, and dry out, get comfortable maybe for the night, right?
See, you guys are the epitome to me of this like philosophy of like putting in the work and developing a location, both for your elk and for your mule deer. And I'm sure we'll get into it in more detail, but if anything, that's like one hole in my own game. Like I'm great at going off on these big, crazy places but I only ever go to them once, and maybe I find something and maybe I don't. But it's like, yeah, I find that really inspiring because I really like the idea of like working a location and figuring out what works about it, what doesn't, having it. And it doesn't even have to be as hardcore as having like a canvas tent, but just like, that's really cool. I think that's probably another reason why you've had the success you've had, is that persistence to like develop the location. I think most people think, I'm just going to find this thing and it's going to be great. And they don't realize that maybe part of it is like building the thing or developing the thing as opposed to just finding it.
Yeah, I'm it's integral to how I've killed my bucks. It's like, I don't know if it's steelhead fishing or something like that, where, the first year you start out, your fish is just being born or whatever. And so that's, the day you put your first cast in, I think it's steelhead, I can't remember, but the same probably shows up everywhere, right? But the day you decide you want to go try and catch a steelhead on the fly, that's the day that steelhead's, that's the year that steelhead's being born, and it's going to go to the ocean for 3 or 4 years, and then you're going to finally catch your first steelhead 4 years later, right? I feel like that's how it is with a big mule deer, right? Like the day you say I'm going to go kill a big mule deer here is like the day that deer is being born, and now you're going to have to hunt it for 5 or 6 years and catch that deer when he's 5 or 6 years old, kind of.
Yep.
But yeah, that's definitely the way it's been. I've you first time into areas, you're very excited and you're kind of like, oh, there's going to be a big buck in here. Oh, there's going to be a big buck in here. And then reality sets in, like, you do that 3 or 4 times, and then you really actually start to learn the area, and really start to see, like, I saw a good sign here, but that was just because of the snow conditions, or that's just because that was where the herd was that day. You start to realize, after, 3-4 years, you really start to see consistent behavior, consistent areas, consistent kind of like patterns that these deer move in. And then you're kind of just locking in and fixating on the particular areas that you're going to find the deer in, and then a particular deer that's in the area that you want to kill, right? And definitely when I'm hunting the ridge, that's kind of what it is. I've kind of given up on the fact that I'm just going to bump into a random mass of deer that's trucking through the area for some random reason, right? It's like I'm generally going to know the deer before I shoot it. And generally there's only a couple deer over 5 years old in the area, and those are the ones I'm going to be focusing on, right? So everything else you're just kind of keeping tabs on and waiting for it to blow up or turn into something special, right? And the odd time, deer always move, right? So the odd time they just wander off and disappear, and the odd time something new just wanders in. You're like, okay, cool. But for the most part, it's like I've already seen this deer in person or on camera or, found its sheds or something, right? And then you kind of realize that the deer is in the area and start to really focus in on where it's hanging out, right? Sure. But yeah, it was getting back to the season. That first trip up, it was super cool because I got killed Bart 2 years ago. We had this cool buck come in that had some junk and looked like it lost its eye. It showed up a couple times and it was a really good sign. I was like, okay, something mature moved in, took over kind of Bart's area. And Bart was kind of like the last mature deer that was in there that we were aware of anyways. And this buck looked promising. And then didn't see it the next year, but saw another mature deer that maybe was it. Didn't get a good look at it through the cams, never saw it in person. And so then the only buck that we were kind of knew about and were aware about was this kind of really cool, really good framed 4-point that, on a camera looks like a stud,
right?
But cameras are deceiving, right? Like how old it is, how big its ears are, how big its head is. And then these horns on it, like it had really nice, clean, deep forks front and back. And not many deer there have good fronts and backs. You're kind of getting one or the other. Either it's a big, massive back forks and kind of crab claw fronts, or some variation of that. But there's the odd buck. All the biggest bucks there are just like the first like 3 or 4 year old deer that actually has fronts and backs, and all of a sudden it turns into something good, right? So this buck was looking like a stud, but really didn't know how big he was because I couldn't, had nothing to compare him to. And then I found his shed, last spring or this past year's spring. In a known area, right? So found a shed and realized, okay, he's not that big. He's really not a big buck. I was like, he's a 3-year-old deer, 2.5 or 3.5 years old. But he just got a really like good frame and didn't have brow tines really yet or anything like that. Very, thin horn, like 3 inches of mass, 3.5 inches of mass kind of thing, like a very young buck. Anyways, first trip into this area, we split up. I started heading down to some open stuff. I was going to do a big lap. We had fresh skiff of snow, I think. Yeah, we did. We had a fresh skiff of snow. And so my whole idea is like, there's this one bench and I'm going to go do a lap around it and see if there's any fresh big tracks heading in or fresh big tracks heading out. And then after,
give me an idea of the size of the area you work on the ridge. Like,
so I'll work probably a total of like 5Ks in a day on like a big day. Okay. And that 5Ks of hiking, I'm going to hunt like a 300 meter pocket.
Yeah.
And then and then a 300 meter pocket. And then if I'm lucky, I'll get to like a third pocket like that. So I'm just, there's like 3 or 4 places that you could probably kill a buck in and are worth hunting slow. And the rest of you are just kind of, try not to go so fast that you sweat too much or, ruin any chance of possibly killing something, because you're obviously going to bump deer in between these areas. It's just not as like promising that you're going to connect and make it happen. Right. So very small pockets, right? Very small pockets, and kind of look at like the timber hunting side of things. If you're hunting thick shit, it's kind of like take all the areas out you can't kill a buck, and now you're left with where you can kill a buck, right? And so it's kind of like if you, depending on how you break it down, it's like you're just instead of saying, well, you can't kill a buck anywhere here, this place stinks and this sucks. It's kind of like, well, there's only a couple places you can kill a buck here, right? And then you kind of like, okay, well, that's where I got to focus. How can I get from these points to these points and then hunt them really effectively? Right. And the deer are going to be the same way. Like, the deer do not want to feed, bed, and eat all day, every day in heavy, shitty blowdown with like no visibility and super loud and something like that. Like, they want to get on some nice benches. They want to get to some of the other food sources. They want to go and chase does and do all this other good stuff. So it's like, in my mind, that's kind of like the key, right? Is like find those little pockets that you can actually kill a deer in and then work them, because the deer are actually going to end up in those places, right? So you're actually going to have,
that makes sense.
Higher concentration of those spots, and like, you'll bump in the other areas. They'll go bend those other areas to get from predators and find some reprieve from everything else. But generally, they're going to end up in a few of these areas. So I just basically do cycles through these areas depending on the time of season and the kind of weather we're having, right? And so some areas where like I killed Bart, that area gets substantially better when the snow hits. So the more snow in the high country, the more densely packed the deer get in there. In early season, there might not be any deer. And Bart was there, and I think Bart was there early because we killed him very early season. It was still October, I think, when we killed Bart. But killed him very early, and I think he spent his whole winter there, and he had broken his leg a couple years prior, or the year prior, which is the year he blew up and had like a 93 or 94 inch one side. It was like 7, 8, 9 points on the one side, and then just like a big 4 or 5 point on the other side. That year, I think is the year he broke his leg, and then that kind of sent a shock to his hormones, and his horn just blew up because of it. But he stayed very close, and he was on the cams all winter, shed, super close to where we found him on cams. And the next fall, he was literally there pre-season, like pre-rut. He was already in there. But to me, he basically habituated himself with there. He was doing good with predators. He was doing good enough with food, and he just wasn't spending a lot of time anywhere else. And so it was like, super lucky. And when I bumped him, we hadn't seen does, hadn't seen tracks, and I killed him that same day, grunting him in late October, right? So it was just one of those things where he'd habituated there, maybe because he broke his leg and was traveling less, and then realized, fuck, I don't need to go summer up high, and I don't need to wait for the snow to push me down. And this is just, this place is good. Got enough food, got enough cover, and nothing's bothering me. So I killed him early season, and that area normally isn't the early season spot. It kind of packs full. Like late season is really productive. If you go post rut in there, it's like you're going to see, like, on a good day, 5 or 6 young bucks in there, all just kind of like packed in there, socked in there, doing a thing, and you might bump a serious buck or might not, right? But anyways, that's kind of a tangent there. But went to the spot that we found the shed, started this lap, and I started getting too low. I was getting kind of cliffed out.
Yep.
And I was like, missed my mark. Like I don't walk this route very often, but I was like, I missed my mark. I'm going to back out. And then kind of climb up higher and circle into some better looking country. It's not so steep and cliffy, right? So backed up, kind of focusing on where I could find a route, and I found a bit of a trail and a bit of a route. So I just started grinding. It's super steep, and I'm just kind of walking. Also realized I'm in an opening, and it's kind of meadowy. I look straight up, and then there's this stud buck standing there staring at me, and then there's a doe, and there's another doe. I'm like, okay. So I went to binoculars first. I was like, okay, he's decent, but he's not massive. And so I started grunting, doing my thing. And long story short, never actually, I chambered around at one point, but I was never kind of going full bore, like I got to get ready to shoot this thing. I was still kind of gauging. Realized he was serious enough, chambered, got my gun back on the shoulder, and then I just really wanted to look him over, right? And at this point, I'm only 50 meters from him. Okay. And the does are between like 40 and 60, right, doing their thing. And it was really cool because, these are those experiences where in a higher pressure area, it's like you kind of get that one look where everybody's frozen, and, you maybe make a grunt and you can stop them once or twice, but generally they're kind of like screwing off at that point, and you're going to have one kind of chance to get a shot off, and you got to pick your, are you going to shoot this or not? Is it the buck you're looking for or not? So it was really cool because he just calmed right down and just went to chasing the does, and you start hurting this one doe.
Did you get phone footage of this?
Yeah.
I watched this then.
Yep. So I posted the whole story.
Yeah. I remember this.
Knocking him down. I posted all that video footage of him, right? And it was really cool. And what the video footage doesn't show is that he actually bolted out of the area, and there ended up being 2 more does in the group. So there's 4 does and him, and he was just focused on the one doe that was with them. They all broke loose, whether they winded me or what, I'm not sure, but they broke free and they were gone. And I was just like, holy shit, like, that was sick. Like I spent 10 minutes with, like a 160-inch buck at 50 meters, right? Back and forth, herding, neck stretched out, doing his thing. And so I was just kind of like, decompressing from that.
Yeah.
Unchambered, did my thing, and like, would have been on my way, but I was just kind of soaking it all in. And then literally this doe comes popping up out of this cliffy area, comes popping out to me, and then he's right behind her. And then he just literally just started dogging her right in front of me. I was just like, holy shit. So I got more footage of him again, and I just let them kind of walk off, right? And I was like, that is wicked. And so, I get up in this thing, and I let them go, and I kind of did like a soft circle around not to push them. And I kind of just let them kind of get tucked away, and I did my loop, got a spot of coverage. I had no coverage where it was, got a spot of coverage, and I sent Rick a message. I was like, hey, there's a pretty solid buck in the area. If you see him, he's deep fork front and back. He's totally worth hanging a tag on, right?
Yep.
And at this point, I was pretty convinced it was the buck from the year before. I kind of knew who he was, and I was like, he's really blown up, right? He's really solid. But like, I wasn't going to notch my tag with him. And funny enough, I ended up crossing a really mature track. And it's this big track in this like, early season wet snow. And I'm like, fuck, there he is. And I was like, so I texted him again. He's like, he's coming right for it, because I know where Rick was, or had a good idea. I was like, he was doing this other lap around the other side of this and going to circle in, and then he's going to work these kind of breaks on the other side. And so he's coming right for you. So I kind of dogged the track and blah, blah, blah. Well, long story short, he never sees him. I never see him. He's on 2 or 3 groups of does. We do a big day hunting, and then we're on our way out, and we're kind of like, oh, that was good. Tomorrow we'll head up high and hit the high country, right? And we're on our way out, just stomping our way through. And we jump that buck. Rick knocks him down, figure everything out. We're like, holy shit. And then we realized like that was a different buck that was in there that morning that I cut his track. This buck hadn't moved 50 yards from where I left him. He dogged that doe, put her to bed, and they bedded down. I walked all the way around him and just cut another big buck that happened to be in the area that day, making rounds, right? So really cool how it played out. But wicked buck, as good or better than what I thought he was when we got on him, right? He's healthily over like 160. He just had a really cool, he's like the epitome of like a perfect buck for how big he was. Like you can't get a buck that's more evenly, got some spread, got some mass, got forks, big main beams that kind of curl in. It was just kind of like, if that buck was any less perfect, I would have shot him for being like imperfect. If he was like really heavy backs and small fronts, he'd be like, oh yeah, this buck's never going to mount to anything else, right? He's already topped out and he just doesn't have what it takes. He was just like that perfect buck that just had a bit of everything and just like kind of stacked everything up perfectly, right? So a pretty sweet buck. So we packed him out, and then I came back maybe 3 more trips, and the buck that I was curious about the year before that might have been the same buck that lost his eye, but we weren't sure because we hadn't seen a good picture of him. That buck showed up, able to compare those. Had him in summer, had a picture of him, knew he was going to be in the area. When I saw the summer picture, I was like, that's it. Like if he's summered in here, and I had pictures of him last year, I was like, he's going to be in here this year for sure. There's no way he's leaving this area. So I kind of figured he's in there. And then sure enough, he showed up on cam. I think it was the next week or the week after that when I went up. He was showing up on 2 or 3 cams right near camp. And I was just like, okay, he's in there. And I kind of sat in camp that night, and I was solo that weekend. Had 2 or 3 pictures on him on different cams. And I was like, got to make a decision now because I think I'm going to bump this buck. I think this is going to be the buck that I bump into this weekend. And so I sat kind of, fire roasting in the wood stove and just kind of searching through the old pictures of him and the new pictures of him. And I was kind of looking, I was like, he's stacked on a lot of size over last year. And last year he was heavy. And so I kind of thought he was an old buck that maybe wasn't going anywhere. And then this year he had same mass and all of a sudden had fronts and backs and had like good clean forks, had spread. And I was just like, kind of looks like he's on the up still. And like he's looking pretty solid. And I'm kind of like, maybe he's 5'6" at this point and could have a couple of good years of growth in him. So I was like, he wasn't this buck that was going south and like, was losing his front forks, was going to become a 3-point or something like that. And just had like, big backs, something like that I see up there all the time. So I kind of looked at it. I said, he's literally Rick's buck with like an extra inch on every time. He's essentially the same buck that I walked on 2 weeks earlier. And I was like, and he looks like he's still on the up. And I was just like, I've killed Bart. I said, this buck's not as big as Bart. He's not as big as my other 2 biggest bucks or 3 biggest bucks behind Bart. He's right in the same size zone. I was just like, I don't need to kill that buck on this ridge, right? So I made that kind of decision consciously in my mind, knowing that, see a buck on the run in the timber that has big forks and mass, and you might just pull the trigger. Right? So I got in there the next day, worked the route where he, where I killed Bart, and started doing that because now it was like kind of mid-late November. And sure enough, super foggy and shitty. Bumped a nice little buck in the morning. Went through that and then bumped like a herd. And I could hear them. They're meandering. They're bumping into each other, doing this and that. I just couldn't see anything. So kind of debated for a while, like, do I push in on them grunting or do I just kind of wait? And so I waited out for like 20 minutes grunting, and they kind of just slowly worked themselves away. I just kind of figured, what? Best bet at this point, probably just with how much fog there is, I'll do a big lap around them. I've got a good route that takes me through some decent fur. I was like, and I'll just kind of circle back in on them from above, and hopefully the fog clears a bit. They calm down, bed down, and I get on them, right? So sure enough, don't jump any more deer, make a big lap. And I'm kind of working my way back in from above, and I bump 2 does as soon as they spring out of their bed. There's this nice open kind of chute below me. And then this solid buck comes bombing out of there. So a couple grunts, and he ends up crossing this little kind of opening straight down below me about 100 yards, which is pretty long shot for that area. Like most of deer, it's like you're 50 yards and end to get a shot off. So it was kind of a cool spot for that. Managed to watch him running. He looked bigger in person than he did on cams, which kind of got the heart going. So I was chambered and I was up against a tree, and then he just came across broadside, and I just kind of hesitated and figured, I think that's him, and just didn't pull the trigger. And then I kind of sat there and questioned afterwards. He got into some thick stuff, but I grunted and watched a few more times with the timber, got a couple glimpses of him. I was like, if it's not the same buck, it's his carbon copy, just like a little wider than I expected him to be. And I was like, but everything else looked the same, right? Dark horn, same fork, same frame, just looked a little wider than what I saw on the camera, right? So I let him go, finished my route, got up in some really nasty weather, circled back in that night, bumped a couple more little bucks. And then the next morning, went back to the other place where we killed that buck with Rick, and ended up finding the same small buck I saw that morning before, which is really cool because it's a really young buck with big front starting out, nice frame, and he's like 2 years old. And so for me, that's like kind of the exciting part for that area. Is like when you see a young buck with good genetics, it's like, it's pretty exciting knowing that that guy makes it through another year or two and figures out his shit with cougars and wolves and all the rest. He's going to be really great. He's one of those bucks that could be pushing a huge typical frame, which would be really sweet in 2 or 3 years, right? So pretty pumped for the area for this coming year. But like haven't pulled the trigger on a deer in I think 2 or 3 years since he killed Bart, right? So, not itchy trigger yet, but I'm sure this coming year I'll start to get the itch to try and put something down, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of note about knowing what's in the area and where they're at also plays into this concept of like developing an area, because you're thinking much longer terms. Like, it's not like I'm passing on this pretty nice buck. It's like I'm letting this guy grow because I'm likely going to have a shot at this buck next year. And what I really want is this buck next year. Like, this buck this year would be okay, but what I really want is this buck next year.
Well, and just to see what he's capable of, like what is he going to do, right? And what I've kind of seen is, and I don't, every area is going to be different, and all deer are different, right? But if you can get to an area where there's not so much pressure, which is the reason kind of went where I went, I had a great spot with great bucks, just as good, but probably better genetics than where I am now, where I killed most of my bigger bucks. But it was, there was pressure. And it was like, you let a buck walk, there's no guarantee you would see it again, right?
Yeah.
You were just hoping to make it through the other hunters, and you happened to be the hunter that was able to bump into him, right? So it was one of those things where letting a buck walk didn't really mean anything. It was like, it's just as likely to be killed by somebody else, right? So this area, I have the confidence where, there's the odd boot track in there, but almost nobody hunting it. If anybody more than once a year gets in there, it'd be, surprising for me for sure. It's basically just me and Rick and a couple others in there that are friends, right? So when I'm in there, it's kind of like that buck I saw this year, that young one, don't have high hopes, like fingers are crossed, but that's the deer that's going to be killed by a cougar this year. Like, it does seem like a lot of young deer get killed.
Yep.
And if they can make it to like 4 or 5, that's really when they kind of settle in and start wintering in the same area in that spot. And so you find their sheds, you're killing them in that spot next year, or you're bumping them in that spot again next year. And once they survive like their 3rd or 4th year, it's kind of like they're going to get away from the cougars and the wolves from here on out, right? Like they'll meet their demise. Don't get me wrong. Like, they're going to get killed by a cougar or wolf eventually, but they're very more resilient than the younger deer are in that area. Like, they kind of just end up in some blowdown in the winter. They hunker in, and the cougars don't seem to get on them, and the wolves won't go near that country, right? They stay in the open stuff and do their thing. So it kind of works out that if you see a buck through to that like 4 or 5 years old, there's like a good chance you're going to catch him the next year or two, still alive, still kicking it, and really focused in the same spot, like not traveling far, locked in, owning that area, and kind of, going where he sheds every year, right? And I've got to the point where I've literally found sheds 10 feet apart from 1 year apart. Find like a nice 4-point frame. Like, oh, cool. Look 5 feet over. There's a shed from the last year. And you're literally thinking like a deer walks a kilometer or 2 or 5 in a day, sometimes just, fooding, bedding, this and that. It's like, and they shed between a window that's like a month long or even more, right? Depending on, summer as early as December. And, summer as late as March, middle of March. It's like, over a 2-month period, this deer happens to end up in the exact same spot twice in sheds. It just kind of showed me that like how many deer will end up in the exact same spot, right? And so many other hunters I've talked to, find a shed here, kill a buck there, right? It just ends up happening that way.
I wonder too if they've ever done any research about like the propensity or the likelihood or like how repetitive shedding behavior is with one deer. Like, deer as a whole have this big window, but I wonder if like a deer tends to have like the same kind of patterns, because it all has to do with hormones. So it's like, and you would think if they have relatively the same food available and relatively the same circumstances, maybe that window, would be interesting thing to, I'm sure somebody's done some research on that. I have no idea.
Yeah. So if a buck sheds, January 1st, 1 year, does he shed, the same week next year, or is he 2 months out, right? And there's got to be something said for that. The main variable there, just like how healthy they go into the winter and how nutrient like rich the forage is that year, and how bad the snow is, right? Yeah. But I almost kind of wonder if everything was similar, will they end up in the same place at the same time dropping their horns, and that's why they become predictable, right?
Yeah, so even if it's not the same week, do they end up going through the same thing? Like the snow tends to, even if the snow melted 4 weeks later, well, when the snow melts, that's when they go to this place. And so the kind of like incentives or the motivating forces that are at play all kind of combined up to where they're most likely going to be doing the same kind of thing in the same place.
80 or 90% in the same area because of all that kind of similar kind of stuff happening here. Yeah, for sure. Right. There's got to be a bit of that. And when I first started shed hunting the area, it was weird because I was like, I found so many different sheds, and what ends up happening is in BC, it's like if the shed's 5 years old, you can't tell if it's 5 years old, because depending how much sun hits that spot and like where it's buried and how wet that area is, it's like 5-year-old shed could look like it's 8 years old, or it could look like 3 years old. And it's like, so I was finding sheds and I was like, oh, these genetics are so similar. And then I just cleaned the area out. I just shed hunted the shit out of it, and literally didn't realize until long after that those sheds were so similar. That was the same buck.
Right.
And it's just, the smaller, younger version of him just happened to be in a sunnier spot that just got, like sunbaked, or vice versa. His older shed of when he was older, which was the freshest shed, ended up being in like the sunniest spot and looked chalked out and looked like it was a different buck. And in reality, what I've found is like, half a dozen sheds off the same buck spread out, in various areas. And that's why they'll look so similar, because it was the same buck, at age 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I was just picking up random sheds from him that didn't get picked over by rodents and were findable, right? And it's just like, you couldn't tell at the time because you're just finding sheds. You're like, cool, this is a big buck. Cool, that's lots of big typicals in here. And then you realize, oh, that was one deer, and managed to find the same sheds over and over and over again. It's just, some looked older, some looked fresher, and it wasn't relative to his age, because it was just one got more moisture, one got more sun, and they age at different rates, right? So it's kind of hard to tell early on in an area like that how that's the same buck or not. But then after I basically shed hunted every inch of it, I kind of realized that was one buck, right? And, I found this other heavy slug buck that I got on camera, and found a similar buck coming up in age. And I'm thinking, holy smokes, there's like this weird thug gene where they just get these heavy baseball bats and blade it out. I'm like, this is cool. I'm going to find another buck like this. And then, you look back 5 years later, it's like, fuck, that was the same buck. It was just, that one just looked way older as a young deer, but it was sitting in this nice grassy slope that had, good sun exposure in the summer, and it just got sunbaked, right? So it looked like it was 5 years older, but it actually wasn't, right? So it's kind of funny. You look back, and what it makes you realize is that you're hunting a small population of bucks, right? This ridge holds, 40 deer. And it's a small place for 40 deer, but, only 50% are bucks. And then they die more often than the does because they're fighting and competing and all that. So maybe it's only 30 or bucks, right? And then you get to it, it's like, there's only 4 or 5 deer that really live to be an old age out of that 30, right? So at any given time, you're not hunting a very big group of mature deer. Yep. There's a lot of 1-year-old to 3-year-olds, and then there's the ones that make it through, right? And so you realize you're really picking on, particular deer that are going to go the distance, that are going to get mature and going to be, cool deer to shoot one day, right?
Yep.
And it's not like a never-ending supply. It's like you got to be very selective. And if you don't know the area, like, good luck, right? Good luck just kind of randomly bumping into one of these, 4 or 5 deer that live in the area and getting shot. And that's kind of where the timing pays off. You know that, like, we're going to end up here, they're going to end up there, or they're going to end up here. And it's just a matter of timing, snow conditions, and all the other shit that goes into it to make an encounter work, right?
Yep, 100%. Okay, so let's get into some of the more technical part. And this is something I've found interesting, both when we're talking about your mule deer hunting and your elk hunting, is that you have purposefully compromised like herd quality in order to get away from pressure, very consciously, in order to change what type of hunt that you're going to have. I would like to hear what your kind of parameters, or what are you looking for in a spot? Is it the combination of like it can't be too good because then everybody's going to know it's good, or you know, I kind of want to find out those little secret hidey holes. Like, what's your actual approach when you're like, okay, I need to go develop a new spot, or I need a spot in the first place?
Yeah, and I've had a lot of methodology when I went into my current spot. I mean, part of it, like a big part of it, is just wanting to explore deeper, further, and like, if you don't have that as a hunter, it's kind of weird almost, right? Like, generally, as soon as you get on foot and start hiking, it just makes you want to go further.
Yes.
Because you just like, you get to where your legs end and you say, fuck, I really wish I could have gone to that next ridge, or really could have gone to the next gully, and I wonder what's up there. And I was still on tracks. They must be all over the next ridge, right? So you always have that. And then reality is normally further's not the answer, but they end up being somewhere in between, right? But it's one of those things I was looking at, you know, okay, do I hunt good areas with good genetics with lots of deer where there's lots of pressure? And that's probably one of the top ways to kill a decent deer, is to go where there's known big deer, there's known good country, there's good habitat, and there's good access. Like, you're going to just, you know, you're going to have more luck in a scenario like that where you're just going to randomly bump into a buck that's decent. It's like, that's probably a really good way to kill a deer. And that's kind of maybe where I was before this. But what ends up happening is that you're at the point where you're going to cap out and just say, you're just waiting on luck.
Yeah.
Right. You can
and bad luck too, like you've already mentioned. You could, just as you could be lucky and bump into something, you can be unlucky and somebody else is going to bump into it. So there's you have less control over the success of the hunt.
Yeah. And so I think at this point, I was just trying to impose, you know, control and your will on finding a big buck and making it happen. Right. So I'd killed like 2 or 3 deer that were just kind of like that 170 mark. And, you know, age is the coolest part. The inches is just, you know, another way to measure it and look at it. But ultimately, if you get the age and like the genetics, that's what's really cool. That I've got like this buck that's old and it's got all the things going for it to make a giant deer. So that ends up being the pursuit, right? And so this is kind of, when I was looking at this area, I was really looking for something that had like cool, like steep mule deer country with really good summer range, really good winter range. And ideally, nobody is going to catch them in the summer range, and no one's going to bump them on the winter range through logging roads and shit like that. Because reality is, even deer that love stick country or you know, are so smart they don't go in the cuts very often in daylight, they're still going to cross a road after a doe sometime. They're still going to, you know, cross for food or a transition period of the year when they transition from a storm. They're still going to cross a road. Somebody's going to spot them, shoot them, or whatever, or tell their friends, and the pressure's going to get in there, and somebody's going to start killing these deer when they're you know, young and about to be big, or when they're big and have a few good years in them and they're getting killed, right? So I really want to have an opportunity to like be in a place where I can walk away from deer consistently, knowing that like no one else is shooting them. And so for me, I was like, if any good alpine peak, you know, some BC hunters can go and find them and spot them, right? So I was trying to find a place that wasn't so obvious, that had still good summer range with good feed in the summer, and then had like, you know, good quality winter range. And most places in BC, in my opinion, is like you're going to hit winter range where it can only hold so many deer, right? And it's only capable of so much, right? So the summer range might be wicked, and these wicked peaks and all these basins, and God, it's gorgeous, but like, where does that deer go? It has to go somewhere in winter. And if there's not something decent to winter on, you're not going to have, you know, 40 mature bucks in the area, right? It's just going to thin the herd. The herd's only going to get so big because the land's only going to be able to support so many on the winter range, right? So kind of looking for something with good winter range, really good summer feed, and then, you know, what that terrain is, it doesn't really bother me for hunting, because it's just like, I'll go figure that out, whether it's open or thick or not, right? But definitely timing for me was good when I first started going to this area, because wolves were kind of becoming a problem in BC, and that thick country was super, super convenient for the deer, because they could jump the blowdown, and the wolves just kind of steered away from it. So they would hunt the open fur and take out a couple of young bucks, and then kind of that's it. They'd move on. They'd go back up to high country, chase moose, whatever, right? But they'd kind of do their round in there, and they wouldn't really work the deer over that hard. So it was good timing that way, that kind of type of country kind of lends itself to deer being good at surviving against wolves. And cougars will always be there, and they'll do decent in that blowdown. You know, they can walk the logs and all that man bush from trees, but the bottom line is cougars, aren't plethora and aren't turned into packs like wolves are the same way. So you're not going to go in and wipe a whole herd out or push deer into some really shitty country they don't want to be in. And then, there's not doing well and you can't hunt them. Right. So, that kind of worked in my favor. But now that I've done it, my
that's an interesting insight, man. You never hear people complain about cougars.
They're
like
there.
Yeah, but even with the elk, you know what I mean? Like I'm thinking up the Musqueam and stuff. It's not like cougars come in and just wipe out, but that's kind of the impact. I almost think like cougars are a much more like level population, whereas like wolf populations tend to go like really high and really low, and they tend to, and this is exactly what you're mentioning, they tend to have a much more severe impact on the prey populations, whereas the cougars are kind of just like always there, and there's always going to be a little bit of kill, but they don't seem to like detrimentally affect the health of the herd to the point where you're like, there's nothing left here to hunt. I never actually thought about that before.
Yeah. I think you're not far off, man. I think that's probably fairly accurate from what I'm seeing. And if I was going to say, if I could do anything to improve that area that I'm in, it'd be to kill a cougar for sure. There's no doubt, because there'll be 8 or 9 cougar kills in a year there. If I hunt it early enough, I'll find them.
Yep.
And what it looks like is that the cougar goes in and the cougars make a kill every other week or whatever they do. And then the wolves will do a round and clean up the kill sites.
Okay.
Because they'll catch wind of it. And so you'll go in and everything's pulverized. There's barely a bone left on the thing. And jaw bones are gone, teeth are gone, skull's crushed, everything's mowed down. You're just like, holy shit. You're like, but I'm pretty sure it's a cougar kill most of the time. I'm pretty sure it's a cougar kill that the wolves come in and just, they're in their hunting and they get on
pick over.
Cougar kill and they pick it over and take down whatever's left of it, right? So I tend to think, there's a couple of cougars in the area for sure on cam that I've gotten over the years. They're laying and beating, but it's just stable. Yeah. It's like there's 40 deer and they kill 10 every winter.
And they do every year, and the herd just and then the replaces them and you absorb it. Yeah.
So it seems kind of stable, but if I knock down a cougar, there might be an extra mature deer every year, or there might be an extra couple 4 points every year that make it, right? So but anyways, I don't have the time to go up there in the winter anyways to pursue them. It'd be a nasty cougar hunt in the winter up there. It's just too remote to get into, but that'd be kind of probably the thing to improve in the area. But what else were we talking about there?
We were doing location. I just want to call out the insight because this is really interesting, because your insight about the quality winter range and the quality summer range, and then kind of being a little ambivalent about the territory that they're in between, is almost opposite. Most people are looking like, okay, where would deer want to be right now? Which I don't think is a bad outlook, but I think it explains why sometimes you find perfect deer country with no fucking deer.
Yeah,
because I think
be, right?
you're calling out this, if they're not going to be supported in the winter and the summer, then it doesn't matter how good it is in there in the shoulder seasons. The deer just aren't going to be there. I think that's really interesting.
No, for sure. So that's kind of my approach for an area. Is I'm going to look at that, and I kind of like the idea of like to think big and then think small. So if you think about BC, there's not many places in BC that don't have big deer. Right. There really is. Like everyone's heard of a spot that has big deer. Oh yeah, I've heard this round, I've heard of that range, I've heard of that valley or that river or whatever. Like, oh yeah, I heard big bucks come out of there. So it's like you kind of think big. You're like, okay, well, that's where I want to go because I've heard there's big deer in there, or I've heard old tales from old hunters or whatever. And then it's kind of like, oh, that big area kind of condense it to a couple ridges or a couple slopes or a couple kind of basins or whatever. And then it's kind of like that. Then it's the investment of like, okay, now go fucking prove it. Like what's actually in there, right? So cams and then shed hunting, right? And that's kind of my approach, is like, there's only one way to tell if there's big deer in an area, right? It's like either, so there's only 3 ways to, I guess, find if there's big deer. You're either going to get them on a trail cam, you're going to find a massive shed, or you're going to see it in person, right? Right. Seeing it in person is like the hardest and biggest investment. So it's like, if you can't spot them in the summer range, like you're good luck in the October. And if you don't know the area really well, and then come November when it's rut, it's like, you've got to be dedicating your whole rut to a new area, right? So really nice way is to have an area. And this is how I kind of developed this area. Is it took, my first year was just cams. And then the second year, and then the cams got buried in snow. I could never get back to them. So gone. Didn't get them until like July the next year. Okay. And then saw everything I wanted. I was like, holy shit, here we go. So then I was like, shed hunting, right? So then I spent the next like 2 years shed hunting. And then finally I was like, okay, I can't hike in there in a day and kill a buck and hike out. So it's going to be overnight trips. So then I started. And
is that what you'd been doing for like cam trips and shed trips, is just like bomber day trips?
massive day trips, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Early in the morning, full
Yep.
day, and back super late at night. And then
Yep.
at least you got to see the country, put your boots on the ground without having to think things through too much, right? So
Yep.
Getting into that, and then, what ended up happening is I had a really big buck on cam, and then 2 years later, I found one of his sides that was quite old at the time. So I thought it was a different deer that had the same genetics, and it probably was. But then I kind of had the two pieces of the puzzle. It's like huge deer here, or mature deer and fairly big here, and sheds here. And I was like, okay, like I've already picked up on two major things. Like October, they were here, and then the snow got too deep and they were gone. And I couldn't get my cameras a week later. Right. And then, I find sheds down here in spring. It was just like, so I've got this band that I need to work and figure it out. Right. And I literally, when I first saw this area, I thought I could walk that band in a day. Okay. And reality of how thick that country is, like, there's no way you're hiking half that in a day, right? Like it's just annoying.
Isn't that so hilarious about BC? Like I'm planning my sheep hunt for later this year, and it's like, I don't know, man. Like maybe that's a day, maybe it's 3 days. Like it's so crazy how like I've had days that are like 3 kilometer days, like and I busted my ass all day, and that's how much ground I was able to cover. And then you could have a 15 kilometer day. Like it's so wild in BC how the variation in like the difficulty and how much ground you can cover in a day.
2 hours to go 200 meters, and then 20 minutes to go a kilometer, right? And like that's just how it changes so quickly, right? And you do enough of those in your history, and you tend to back out of those 2 hours for 200 meter areas and realize it's not worth it. Find another route because the animals don't like it either. But that spot is particularly bad that way, right? It's very thick, and that's kind of what helps with those pockets is that focus your time in there, right? Because there's no point in hunting the extreme thick stuff. Yeah, just work the semi-thick stuff or really thick stuff, right? Where it's not so bad, right?
And when you're finding this stuff, how do you is this all in your head? Are you taking GPS points? Are you drawing out on a map?
I'm just looking when I'm driving hunting anywhere. I'm just looking at every ridge, and then something catches your eye, and then you go look at Google. And I'm a sucker for Google. You say it's hard to judge stuff. Like you constantly just go look at an elk hunt and say, I did this hike in like 2 hours. We day hunt that, and then that hike, and I can do it in a morning dawn till dusk. And then you go look at some other areas. So you try to compare elevation and distance and figure out what's doable. But I end up just pouring over stuff for way too many hours on Google Earth, just trying to eke out where and what I'm looking into and what I should get my feet into. And then you go, and it's always worse than what you think. But then I kind of make a trip, right? Find the route in, find the closest access point, map out a spot that you think you could drop into a gully, cross the Archery, get over there, and then you'd be kind of up on this little bench or on this little ridge or whatever, right? So that's kind of how that went for that spot. And, so much of the way I was just lucky. I got up there the first time in the fog, and I couldn't see anything, right? And I was just like, it's this way. And then I just got into high elevation spruce. And it's you're just walking through that. You have no bearing where you are in the fog, and you cannot see any undulation in the land. You can't see peaks or valleys or anything. And they just kind of also get to the cliff. And I just kind of sat there for an hour. I was like, well, I should probably cut it quits. It's 3 p.m. and I have no idea if I'm going to make it to this spot. And so I didn't have an inReach or a GPS at that point. But sure enough, fog kind of lifted for a second, and I could see the bench right in front of me. I'm like, fuck, there we go. But this little 50-foot gully is actually a 300-yard canyon I have to cross. And so I was just like, fuck. So I just got to do it. But you know what? It's funny. I did that, crossed it, got on. There's a fresh layer of snow. And that was the day I set 3 cams that ended up breaking that spot open for me, because there was just rubs everywhere, trails everywhere. And I'm just every tree was torn to bits. I was just like, holy shit. I was like, what I just stumbled onto, right? Middle of nowhere. It's it actually the promised land here. So dropped a couple cams, and I literally ran out of there trying to get to my quad before dark. And then, I'm a 2.5 hour quad ride out of there to try and get back to my truck, load up and get home. And, super banger day, but I almost stopped and almost turned around because of the fog and shitty visibility. I didn't know where it was. I almost turned around and headed back out, and just lucky that I managed to make it all come together, got on the ridge, figured it out. And the funny part is I've never been back to that spot. Now I've set some cams in there for sure, just to see what's on, but it's totally one of these areas where they're coming off summer range when there's a storm and there's a bit of snow. And they kind of just shoulder into that area, and then they kind of just wait for the big snow. And some of them move right down right away, and others kind of hang out there. And so I set cams here and there just to see what's going on. But generally, they're kind of there until the snow pushes them out, which right in the rut, it could be last week of October or second week of November, anywhere in there. It's a good time to be in there, but the snow is so unpredictable that, you know, you might go up there one day and it can't get in there, right? So
it's more of a transition zone.
It is, yeah. So they move through there. It's a great place to camp. They come up in the summer and you catch them in the summer on the way up, and you catch them in the fall on their way through before the snow pushes them right out, right? So it's kind of cool, but I'm finding more and more, like, a lot of deer will wait for the deep snow, but a lot of deer will just move right away too. Right. So there's going to be deer to hunt either way. It's not like every big buck's just going to wait till the snow is to the chest deep. Like, you know, a good portion, 2/3 of them will just pop right down, and a couple stubborn ones will just kind of, you know, be pounding snow chest deep for a while until they get pushed right out of there, right? And I've got pictures of them, you know, they're plowing a tunnel, you know, crossing those benches and stuff like that. And you're just like, what the hell? Like, you can't even hunt in that, right? Like, you just wouldn't get in there, right? You'd spend all day hiking through that stuff to get there because you just wouldn't be able to move quick enough, right? So
I've had those days where I'm like, this is dumb. Like, this is a bad decision. Okay, I'm going to go to some of the questions because I know we're getting a bit late here, and maybe we'll try and do some, like, answer them a bit like a little quicker instead of me just asking these fucking long-winded questions.
I did see one. There's one that was grunting and rattling and.
Oh yeah, okay. So let's start right there. How effective do you find grunt tubes or rattling?
Yeah, so it's funny that my biggest buck before I killed Bart was I rattled him in 1 year. And it's a good story. I was up with a buddy, and he's not in as good shape as me. I won't name his name, so he remains anonymous.
Don't call him out.
Yeah. But essentially,
you know who you are, you fat fuck.
And he literally hiked in, and we got this, like, wicked spot. It's like this little cutting of trails, right, where these deer cross all the time. And he's unzipping zippers. He's hacking and coughing from breaking a sweat. His unzippers are open. So I literally was just like, as quick as he started making noise, I was just like rack out. And I just smashing the antlers together the whole time he was moving around. So I did like this 5-minute smash and banging as hard as I could. And I'm looking up, I'm looking sideways, I'm looking all over. And then finally started to quiet down. And so I kind of took a break, and then I went to go again, looking up, looking over, looking down, and I look at him, and he's like freaking out. He's grabbing his gun, his jacket's on the ground, and he's running down this deer trail like a wild banshee. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And so I boogie after him, and he's like looking at me, and he's like, yeah, he's like, I was just like drinking this chocolate milk, and he's like, I was about to grab a cigarette, and he's like, and then I turned around, and there's this huge buck looking at me. He's like, it's huge, man, it's huge. I'm like, fuck, okay. So, no, sure enough, so I rattled a really big buck in that way. And we chased them, and I got footage of him again after we split up and bumped him a couple times. Got footage of him, and that was like the biggest buck I'd ever killed. I let him walk that year, got footage of him, all that, and I've got it posted on BC Backcountry a ways back, right? And literally the next year, I ended up shooting him like 300 yards below that, you know, late season. And the only reason I was able to kill him was because I followed the track in there and got on this big herd, and he kind of popped out, and I saw his shitty G2 that was like a shriveled up worm, and he had this massive 4-point frame otherwise, right? Big main beams. He's like 26, 27 inches wide, and, you know, he's got like these 12-inch G3s coming off his back forks, and he just had this little dinky kind of shriveled up G2. And so as soon as I was in his binoculars or gun up, and I saw that, I knew who I was looking at, and I was like, that was that big buck I passed on last year. And so in my mind, I didn't know if he's bigger at this point. I didn't have a good enough look at him, but I was just like, fuck, he's a year older. He's got to be bigger, right? So I whacked him, and like, he probably went inch for inch identical to the year before. He gained an inch here, lost an inch there. It was like no extra mass, just like he was just that buck with this. He was exactly the same the year after, right? But
yep.
Still a really, really solid buck, right? But rattling, I always do it. I've had very little success. That would be one of like the random times that it worked very well, and pulled that buck straight into like 15 yards. Basically just came over this rise, and, you know, my buddy turned around and saw him like face to face staring at him, neck above the snow, and just like, holy shit, right? Like, just locked eyes and buggered out of there, right? But generally most encounters I'm burping, and I'll use my voice out of convenience if I don't have my grunt tube with me. But I use one like the Primo's, can't remember what it's called, but it's got like a yellow kind of a yellow tab on the top and then a gray kind of tube on it. And it's got like a little compass embedded in it. And you can blow on it and you can suck on it. And it's got reeds in both directions that you can kind of tune to the sound you like. And I normally go kind of mid-range. It's not the deepest and it's not the highest pitch one. But I'm generally just leaving my zipper open, the thing's tucked in my chest against my skin, because if you don't, it'll just freeze up. And so that's kind of the advantage to burping with your voice, is you don't have to worry about freezing up. But and they both work, right? Like deer tend to hear that noise and it doesn't have to be perfect, and it kind of coaxes them down, relaxes them. And if it's pre-rut, they seem to make them pretty aggressive. Sometimes they come charging in. That's kind of how I killed Bart, was just grunting, and he just came in on a string, like ready to fight, right? So grunting for me is like kind of, it's in my everyday kit. I use it nonstop all the time. Every situation I'm normally grunting with that grunt tube or with my voice, one or the other kind of thing.
Okay. That makes
sense. But I like grunting. Grunting, you can just move, right? Grunting, just move. It's like you're not setting up a new sequence. You're just moving through deer country, grunting, and you're jumping and does and bucks doing that, and you're calming them down half the time, and they kind of get a second look and maybe go back to rutting, right? So it's kind of like
it's very similar to the strategy I use my cow mews for when I'm elk hunting, because it's like I'm walking around and making noise anyways, and just every 5 or 6 minutes I just let out a couple of cow mews, and then it's like, well, and if then they hear me, they're just going to think I'm a cow walking around,
making noise and elk.
So worst case scenario, I sound like an elk, you know. And if there are no elk here, well, who cares? It's not like I'm sitting around wasting a half an hour waiting for something to come out. You know what I mean? Totally. Okay, we've already done that. We've already talked about, I mean, you've talked a lot about timber hunting. This guy says something about timber hunting. Maybe, okay, one of the things that I found very interesting that it took me a while to learn is, and you touched on it in this podcast, like not all areas are created equal. And if you treat the whole ridge like quality still hunting, you're never going to go anywhere. But if you don't, But if you blast through all of it, you're going to bump everything. So maybe talk a little bit about how do you get between the good spots without blowing everything out, and what are a couple things that you start to look for to be like, okay, I better slow the fuck down, because like I'm starting to get into that still hunting quality territory.
Yeah. So I kind of like, it's just general terms, because the other problem is when you start describing stuff like this is like people end up imagining an area and it's not what you're walking through. So I'll kind of like kind of precursor to this, just like all areas have their subtleties to them, right? And it's just like some nice open fur. You can move a lot quicker. You can glass a little bit more. The thicker the area, the less you can glass in my mind, because you step and you open up 600 little different Swiss cheese holes to use your binoculars on. Like you just can't get anywhere glassing, right? So the thicker the area, the less your glass is going up. The more open the area, the more your glass should go up and kind of catch a deer on the move, or catch a head or an ear flicker from 100 yards out rather than bumping it, right? So I'm at the point where most areas I'm hunting, there's not a lot of glass going up, because I couldn't sit through there and spot every little wormhole or cheese hole through all the branches and willows to try and find a deer. But that being said, I'll stop and listen long enough to hear noises and catch flickers and movement, and then it's binoculars up, and then kind of the picture starts to evolve and things start to come to life, and you kind of grunt and move and slide in and kind of start to see what's in the area, right? But that being said, kind of on that scale of like, country's so thick you can't move through it. You're just gonna make too much noise and stuff like that. So it's very hard. At that point you just have to make noise and get over it and move.
Yep.
And then kind of the areas are kind of, my pace is dictated by how much sign I'm seeing at the time and how much I expect to see deer in that area. And a lot of time, if I get on fresh tracks, I always just kind of go into stealth mode, right? They might not be huge tracks or anything, but to me, active deer in an area, like I don't have 5 kilometers of country hunt. I got a couple 300-meter patches. So as soon as I get into something half decent that's fresh, I'm hunting it pretty hard.
Yep.
I'm slowing down, moving quieter. And snow conditions make a huge difference in that for me. Like my preference is 0 snow, or snow that's like soft and so quiet.
Isn't it wild the differences? We got hammered by that on the mule deer hunt this year, where like half the days were perfect snow and the other half was like the worst snow you could Like it was like crack, and you're just like, are you fucking kidding me, man? Like the deer are hearing me for hundreds of yards right now, and there's nothing I can do about it. Like,
My
and it was like, it had
preference,
got just warm enough that it was like melty enough that it was squeaky, but that like really cold, fresh powder, that shit's beautiful. Cause it's like somebody put a blanket over everything and even your echoes are dying down. And it's like, yeah, but it's so wild how different the snow can impact the amount of noise that you're making.
100%. And it's funny, like people talk about loud snow and hate it. My preference is this: low snow or no snow or very quiet snow, or the loudest snow you can have. And if you've got the loudest snow you can have and really frozen ground type situation where you're cracking, popping, that's like the only stuff that deer make noise in as loud as you do. And you literally, I've bumped deer in that, and I can hear them run 150 meters and circle back and then come in for a look and check me out. And they will bump and spook and scare and still come in for a look, or they'll literally take you as a deer. And it's just like, you're grunting, you're making noise, but they make just as much noise. They cannot move through that really, really loud stuff any quieter than you can. But everything else in between, it's kind of like this 3-inch little track, and the way deer's elbows work, where they're kind of like almost stomping backwards, like they're not like rolling a foot forward and like kind of crunching slowly. They just kind of plop that foot down and it just goes straight through all the snow, and it gets muffled because there's this little skinny ankle that goes in there with this little paw. It's like they make no noise in like fairly noisy snow, and you're just making a pile of noise. So those conditions I find really hard, and that's kind of like my first 2 years in the area. It was snow early season. It was deep. We couldn't get in very easily. Like start of November, we'd already had multiple snowfalls. And I found that those seasons were really sparse encounters, like really sparse. Like would hunt dawn till dusk on foot in premium areas, wouldn't see deer.
Okay.
Wouldn't see deer. And like, can you imagine like hiking 10 hours in the best country you can imagine, or think that you're going to find deer in, and you can't even see a deer. And so I had a lot of those encounters.
That's my blacktail hunting experience. Like I have seasons, and like people think I'm full of shit. The best season I ever had, I had 30 days into my season, including like preseason scouting, hanging cams, checking cams, days hunting. And in that 30 days in the flesh, I saw one deer and I killed it. And it was like, you hear people complaining about, it's hard to stay motivated when I don't see any animals. And it's like, dude, I don't even know if there's any fucking deer here. Like, let alone am I not seeing them? They're like ghosts. I'm not seeing I wasn't the best deer hunter at the time. And I'm sure, there's an argument to be made. I probably should have went somewhere else, but that's not a terribly unique blacktail hunting experience. Like they are so nocturnal and they move so little. And I could have been walking right by deer. Like who knows? Because they're very much like, that's one of the differences that I'll call out, where like the mule deer will bounce. The blacktail is just going to sit still until like you're a proven threat. And I think most people walk past more blacktail than they actually see. But that's another thing about BC, man. Like people in the States, like it blows my mind. Like the amount of action and target rich environments they have. When you hunt BC, like you almost have to give into the fact that like you're not going to see a whole lot, and you need to be able to stay motivated between sightings or just go home, because this is not something where you're going to get into action every single day. Like it's just not.
And that's why you can't. That's why it's pretty hard to jump into saying I'm going to kill a huge mule deer, right? Because it's just like you got to enjoy just seeing a big track, and that's got to get you pumped, right? And if that's your day, that's your day. A big rub, a big track. Or a trail cam pick, and you're just like, one pick of one deer in one area one time. It's like, if that's all you get, like your odds aren't that great of bumping that deer, but you got to be excited enough and have enough kind of hardness to you that, you just get pumped to see a big track. Yeah, there's a big deer in the area. That's all I need to know. I'm just going to hunt this hard now and know that there's a mature deer at the end of this track. Or I've seen a good picture on a trail cam. I can just work this area relentlessly, just saying my time will come and I'm going to bump this deer, right? So definitely like a lot of that happening in there in the early years when the snow was thicker. And now it's like, banger year this year, we whack a buck nice and early, and it's a really nice buck, and then jump the next, like the biggest buck on the ridge, jump it, able to pass on this, and then see this like stud little 140-inch, 2-year-old deer that's just like on the up, right? It's like you're connecting all the dots, like this is sweet, right? But, snow conditions were good, and it was a really strong, year for the rut, I guess. Everything was active and moving around and doing what it should be doing, right? So just kind of, that's the long-term game of doing 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 6 years in an area where you eventually have that year where everything's working for you, right? Working with you rather than against you.
Yep. I think that's a huge takeaway for BC hunting in general.
Yeah, definitely.
Doe body language indicating bucks are nearby.
Yeah. It depends. Some does stay pretty calm, but generally I'm just doe or deer. I would just, it's just the body language of them being, looking around, flicking an ear back. Like if a deer flicks its ear back once when it's looking at me, I'm just locking in saying there's another deer here.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to work it really hard now until that deer shows itself, or I get an opportunity to get around this deer and calm it down enough to go and try and find it. An ear looking backwards, or it doing a quick check on its oneself. And they might look for escape routes sometimes for sure, but generally any deer that's kind of, either listening for something that's off in a different direction or looking in a different direction, I'm expecting another deer. A doe, lots of time when there's a rut and buck, the doe is actually almost a little more skittish.
Okay.
Right. So the doe's skittish and it doesn't seem like it's you're making it skittish. It's kind of like, this could be a deer that's got a buck that's been hounding her. And she's just kind of like a little bit worried about where he's at right now. He's going to jump on her or what, right? So skittish does sometimes are a sign as a buck around pushing her, right, and keeping her on her toes, for sure. And
yeah, go ahead.
Something interesting this that I really noticed this year. I don't know this before. Like it's actually surprising when you have the right deer on the rut, you hear deer bounding away and jumping, and you're thinking, I blew him out. Like I had 3 or 4 experiences this year where there's deer jumping around and making a pile of noise. And it had nothing to do with me. I just walked in on a buck running a doe, 2 bucks, kind of skirting each other, trying to make their run at this doe. And you just kind of get in the mix, right? So it's almost one of those things, you hear a bunch of noise, like don't automatically imagine a full deer running away and you got to close the gap quickly and try to make a quick call or a shot. Like that might just be deer moving the way they move. And you just happen to come upon them when they're super active doing their thing. And in almost all the scenarios, I just was grunting, making more noise and walked in and there's one of the bucks and I go check a cam, 100 meters away and I see the other buck that was with him, 10 minutes earlier crossing that camera, right? And it's just like, I just walked into a herd of deer doing their thing and they're really loud when they're active and running, right?
I really picked that up watching the whitetails because they had no idea I was there. And like sometimes I'm watching these guys for like 30, 45 minutes and like sometimes they'll come sprinting in and then screeching to a halt. And then they chill out and then they'll run halfway up the hill and bound over there together and then like walk back down. Like they're just doing like random erratic shit that like has nothing to do with me. And I was like, oh, that actually explains a lot of stuff. And it's like, that's interesting. Don't always assume that like you're just blowing
something out. Like it could be just active and it could be on a loop and on a track and making this round and like, don't freak out. Don't go running over like wild banshee trying to get a shot off thinking that it's all over.
Yeah.
It's like, just move in. Like if you're going to get a chance, you're going to get a chance and just try to make some deer-like noises and not blow them out of there. But it might just be just what you're looking for, right?
100%. Okay. We talked about that one. Phone is acting up. I cracked my screen a while back and now every now and then it just stops working. There we go. Okay, you talked about the best call. Any other, you ever use those cans? I use those for blacktails with some success, like the little, I guess.
Yeah, Ryan's gotten a couple nice encounters with it. And sometimes you just question, you don't know, like, you're moving a can or you're making a grunt and then there's just a deer there and it's okay, well, did it walk up on it? Did it walk up on me that was on its path or was it the can or the grunt? So it's hard to like really measure success of something, but I walked around with one of those, periodically and proven, unproven. I can't say it doesn't work. Can't say it works really great. I think any noise that you can make that's definitely deer-like helps, but the more remote it is, the less pressure it is, the more it helps. And like backcountry deer are like really fun to hunt the rut because they expect you to be a deer over some hunter, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
The opposite occurs when you're hunting like a highly driven area that's got roads cut through it and cuts cut through it. It's like that super ruddy day is like down to hours of stupidity versus days of stupidity. And it's like
Right.
You're hunting in like remote areas in backcountry. It's like you have full weeks of stupidity where they're like, they're expecting you to be a deer half the time, and they're letting you walk right in on them and make calls to calm them down and confirm that they think you're a deer. And it's super helpful. But I've had the opposite occur in like highly hunted areas in the past where I'm just like, you make noise and the deer are gone. It's like you hear some rustling and some noise and you make a call and they're going the other way. And it's just kind of like, these deer are just very, very pressured. And like, you got to catch them on the one day when they're, thinking about nothing but running, right? And then you can catch them with it. But it's definitely hit and miss in those types of areas using calls, right?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, this next question is really interesting, and I think I'm actually maybe going to have a couple dudes on it. Maybe we'll do a whole episode about this at some point. But his actual question is, what are some tips for balancing mule deer season with home life? But I want to take this one step further, and maybe you can even like share what you do for a living. But like, you're a guy who gets out quite a bit in the fall season. I'm assuming you got a wife or a girlfriend.
Yeah, got a girlfriend and a dog. Yeah.
How do you, this is a priority for you. How do you approach life so that you can get, the time that you need to get during hunting season? Because it's a big struggle for a lot of dudes.
I just write off October and say, I'm just not going to get the pre-scouting I want done and do the trail cam thing and get hunting earlier as I'd like to. But I don't know, just trying to balance the time. Like I've just clear with my priorities and clear with what I need to do. And honestly, I've got massive rentals in my house. If anyone that's close to me knows, and that's probably.
I think the dude who asked this question knows, because that's why he's like, "How do you balance mule deer hunting with home life and renos?"
Cheeky because I got a 2-year reno on the go here, and I've like got half of the house done. I'm living in it, and life's good, but the other half is still on the go. I got a pool going in the spring, and decks being built. So he's probably poking fun at me, which is fine. But I don't know. I'm just one of those things. I could just knuckle down and just get her done and lose every minute of my life to it. But to me, it's just like, you only get so many seasons, and you gotta put the boots on the ground for those peak days of the season. Like,
so what about work vacation? Do you take like all your vacation during the 2 months, or how do you balance that without the rest of the year as well?
Yeah, luckily enough, I work for a really great company. I have a lot of responsibility. It's manufacturing industry. We build modular, like hotels and social housing and stuff like that. So,
okay.
I've been there for like 11 years now. So I do get 4 weeks vacation, which is super helpful. It's still not enough. It never is enough, right, for a hunter. But I kind of give a week for fishing in the summer at the ocean, 2 weeks for elk in September. And then I've got about a week left that I kind of spread through, vacations with the girlfriend and family and long weekends and stuff like that, extending, and then hopefully try to have a day or two for November. But typically my Novembers are like, I'm leaving work, I'm driving in the dark, I'm hiking in the dark, I'm doing everything I can in the dark to get into the spot Friday night, so that I've got a full Saturday hunt and then a good half day Sunday, and then I'm trying to get out of there before it's too late so I can get home safely, and then back to work Monday. And then obviously there's the Remembrance Day, which is always a hunting day for me, right? Gotta take advantage of that one. So yeah, I mean, I would love to have more time. I used to, like when I did a lot of work on this area, I was working 3 days a week, 12-hour shifts, and then had 4 days off. And that's
tasty.
Super big game changer. And that was like a pivotal moment, because that's when I was just like not making plans with friends because I had the different days off in them. And I was just like, it was just like full solo. It's like, if I want to see something, I want to check an area out, I'm not going to talk to my buddies about, we should go up there. I was just going to go do it. It's like, I got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off, Monday off. I was just like, just go do it, right? There's no point in trying to get somebody to book a day off to come with you. It wasn't going to happen. So suddenly it was just like, I was just spending my time, any free time I had, I could go and check areas out, shed hunt, dedicate a whole day to just looking for a way in, right? Yeah. It's like, you can't do that on 2-day weekends. And I'm back to 2-day weekends now, right? But it's like, had I not done that groundwork, I couldn't be where I'm at now with that spot, right? It was just like, there's all that work getting into it to get it set up and get it developed and learn the area. And now it's just like, now I know exactly what I need to do. And it's like, get off work early on Friday, bogey in there as quick as I can, get in there 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And then the next morning I'm in place hunting deer, 10 steps out of the camp kind of thing. That's kind of it. You gotta prioritize the peak stuff, right? And then give up the stuff that isn't ideal and just say, choose the stuff that makes the most sense and give up the stuff that doesn't, right? And make the sacrifices there to make it all balanced.
Well, and I think we're hearing the same thing again and again and again. It's a long-term perspective. Like, you are not going to take a week off and go to a new area the first time and kill a giant buck. Maybe you will, but people get struck by lightning and win the lottery too. It's not a good strategy in life for success. I think it's
I just like the idea of repeatable, right? Is it repeatable?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I could just go to that spot again and hike in, but it's like, to me, it's really not repeatable on a 1 week trip and definitely not a weekend trip, like backpack weekend trips. Like, holy shit. Weather-wise, that might not be more than a half hour hunting, right?
Yeah.
I've done scouting trips where it's a 4-day scouting trip, backpacking in and out, and I have 3 hours of sunlight, spot 6 does, and they're like, well, I guess that was the whole trip was just that, that 1 hour of sunlight. The rest was fog, snow, rain, zero viz, and that was it, right?
Yep.
So it is one of those things. It's that's why I don't do as much early season with mule deer. As much as I'd love to do some of that backpack hunting for muleys, it's like it's not as predictable. The weather really screwed you over quite a bit, and you need to plan for more than just a couple of days. I find it's like a couple of days is just like a shot in the dark. You might get lucky, you might have a good spot, and things might go your way. But it's like, shit, man. Like, you might just spend that whole time trying to locate a deer, and then you need another week to kill him, or cross his paths, or interrupt him, or ambush him, or something like that, right? So I don't spend a lot of time doing that because it's that's might as well hunt mule or elk there and then save the muley for November, because it's the banger time for me for sure.
Makes sense. Okay, last one, because it's getting late here and we all got to work in the morning. This says morning and evening mule deer tips, but anything that you can think that's, how important are those 2 times a day? Because to me, that's the other argument for getting in there and staying, because it's like, I used to do a lot of when I lived in Fort Langley and I kind of hunted the mountains out behind Chilliwack, I would do a ton of day hunts. I was leaving at my place like 3 o'clock in the morning to get in there so I could hike in the dark to get to the spot, so that as the sun was rising, I was in like what I was hoping was a more high activity area. But that's another thing, especially with deer. So maybe talk about that a little bit. How important are those morning and evening hours?
Yeah, and so there's super big differences to me, because I used to hunt a lot of clear cuts and a lot of pounding roads, and I'll still do days like that in the season with buddies and love it, but I just can't do that for the full season. Like, I got to be on my feet. But that type of hunting, man, that like the morning and evening is so critical. And I always found morning to me was the more you're in the area, the better. Be in the spot. You could literally pull in the dark in a vehicle and let the sun come up around you, and you kind of think, oh, there's nothing here, and then just comes to life. 10 minutes of light in, all of a sudden deer are just moseying around, they're feeding, there's a buck chasing a doe, and it's just like the whole thing comes alive, and you're sitting there thinking, holy shit, this is pretty cool, right? And then kind of evening, I've kind of found the opposite, where the deer aren't moseying and doing the thing, they're motoring. It was like the deer in the evening they're popping out of the woodwork, they're making tracks, looking for a hot doe on the prowl, and it was like a really good time to intercept a deer crossing a cut or a road or something like that, right? And I found in those types of areas, you're really just working kind of like those transition zones where they're crossing to get somewhere else, or a feeding zone because it's a clear cut and it's full of food. And so it was really good evening and night. When you get into like on foot, I'd still prefer that early morning. The earlier I can get to the spot that I want to be, the better. And I hunt right till dark on foot. But you're moving through their bedding zones, you're moving through their feeding zones, you're moving through all their zones. So it's like shit can happen at any point. You just might be bumping them out of their bed rather than catching them actively feeding through an open zone, right? And you can kill them either way. So it's to me, it's less important when you're hiking. And that's kind of what we used to do back in the day. Me and my dad would be like, morning you crush the roads, and then you'd go hunt a strip of timber or go deep into like a little canyon, pop out with a couple of hours of light left, and go work some areas in the dark, right? It's a pretty effective way to kill deer and cover all the bases. But now I'm just basically on foot from the morning till dusk, and I definitely kind of pick my poison. The first few hours are definitely better than the rest, and the kind of last few hours can be pretty productive as well. But it's not like midday comes and I'm giving up, or I'm not going to see deer anymore. It's like I'm just going to bump them out of their bed or catch them in between feeds or something like that, right? And weather plays into that, right? A storm hits and they're bedded down, they're not doing nothing, right? And then storm breaks for a bit in the middle of the day, and all of a sudden they're up feeding, doing their thing, getting in what they did in the morning or evening, right? Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That was heavy duty. This is a mule deer 101. Thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Anything you wanna close out with, or or share before we wrap things up?
Gosh. No, I mean, I talk to a lot of guys on Instagram, right? So a lot of guys reach out, and it's pretty cool. I've been following along with a few guys that are asking for this, asking for that, and showing me some cool pictures. And it's kind of cool to see it come together and guys make it happen, right? So I'm pretty accessible there. People are having questions, and I'll just, basically just put it out there that I'm going to preach, this whole conversation, preaching this, preaching that. I literally, there's again, slayers out there that are 10 times more accomplished than me. And so I have very strong opinions about what works for me, but like, it's totally subjective, and it's totally just, find a strategy that works and just make it yours and do it and repeat it. And you'll find how to make that strategy work, because, I've been called out for many things, right? And seasoned guys that I totally have so much respect for, that are like, I'm like talking about sneaking through the forest, being really slow and being really calm and like just barely, nothing knows you're there. And they're like, fuck, I kill all my deer banging around like a big buck on the move, right? And I'm just like, good point, like I should do that more often once in a while and just make more noise, right? And it's like, whatever works for you is whatever you put the most effort into, right? The plan that'll work is the one that you stick to it and just keep doing it, because you'll totally hone in on that plan and make it function for yourself, right? So, take everything I said with a grain of salt, because it's worked for me, but it's certainly not going to work for everyone in every area and every situation, right? But I don't even know where it's going with that, but I don't know. I'm big on the timber hunting, right? I think it's super cool. And a lot of those people that reach out is kind of like, they're kind of wondering about the timber and how I hunt this, what I do that. And it's some cool people. Like, I've got guys send me pictures like this is wicked, like stud bucks in velvet. And you can tell from the topography, it's like, that's not prime mule deer habitat. Like, that guy is finding some deer, and like, it's probably close to his place and a place that he loves. And he's locking in on a deer. And it's like, that's super rad. Cause it's like, there's only like one deer per square kilometer there, right? Like, it's moss, there's no feed, it's like big cedars or something. You're like, that's not mule deer country, right? Like there's mule deer country near that, but like, they're just putting in the time and effort to map out an area, and big deer will end up going to the same spots and finding a way to live there and make it their hidey hole, right? And like, it's really cool to see that, right? So it's just kind of funny how the timber hunting is kind of like the last frontier in my mind, right? Like, every mountain, every ridge, every alpine basin, somebody's been in there and hunts it. Somebody's looking for bucks there, and every sweet winter range that's got, high quality habitat with a lot of mule deer, there's a pile of people hunting it. It's like the last place to go, man. It's just that thick, nasty stuff that no one else goes in. And if you put the time in, it's pretty fun. It's pretty cool. You won't see as many deer. You won't pass up as many deer, but every encounter is like a trigger pulling situation. It's like, you just are just tromping through the forest, and it's like, you bump a doe and it turns into a buck and it turns into a stud, and he's 10 or 15 or 30 or 40 yards away. And it's like, everything happens in like a split second, and all of a sudden you're looking at, a sweet stud buck on the ground or something, right? So it's cool encounters where, you're not blasting 100 deer a day and you're not seeing 3 or 4 bucks or multiple 4 points, some of that. But, you end up getting your encounters, and they're pretty sweet. And I say all this, let everyone go to the thick shit so I can start hunting the open stuff again.
I love it. That's great. That's
sure.
awesome, man. Well, I'll link to the Instagram page and all that, although 99% sure everybody who follows us follows both of us, so it's not a big deal. But I always appreciate the conversations, man. I learn a shitload, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, it's fun, man. Glad we pulled it off and pulled it together. It's always a good time just chatting.
All right, brother. Have a good night. We'll chat soon.
Yeah, later, man. Have a good one.
All right, guys, there you go. It was almost 2 full hours jam-packed with golden mule deer tidbits. This is one of the ones that I'm going to have to go back and listen to myself and probably take some notes. I want to thank Jordan again. Dude is super helpful and just selfless when it comes to sharing information, and I always appreciate that about him. So again, if everybody could take a moment and engage with the podcast, like, share, comment, subscribe, it's greatly appreciated. And until next time, thanks for tuning in.